Well, we're back here at the Hall of History, and we're going to take a look at the French and Indian War. It's where the British and some of their Native American allies were fighting the French and their Native American allies. Quick look at the time period. The trailer for Last of the Mohicans, if you click the link on here, gives you a pretty good idea of what it was like at that time. This movie was about 1992 with Daniel Day-Lewis, and it's a pretty good representation of the period then. And later in the week, next week, we'll take a look at a couple other trailers of the movie, looking at some of the battle tactics used by the French and the Indians. Most of the French settlements were just large tracts of lands that were very, very lightly populated. You're looking at quite a bit between of the land between really east of the Appalachians to the Mississippi River, getting up into what was now Canada and all the way down to New Orleans. Most of the French who were in the New World were trappers and voyagers. They were on very good terms with the Native Americans. They adopted their ways, married into the tribes, and were really pretty good neighbors with the Native Americans at this time. The French and Indian War, as you can see here, from 1754 to 1763, was a fairly long time period. As you would think, between France and England had been fighting for centuries. They both wanted control of the North American territory. Definitely, the French trappers, that was, their source of some income there for France. And Great Britain definitely on the 13 colonies that we looked at earlier. Quite really, the first disputes were over the Ohio River Valley. Again, large rivers were the highways of the day. We think of I-96, US 131, but really the rivers led to easy transport of goods and for trade. We're going to look at this a little bit more. Washington led an attack, and Washington's party were defeated and forced to surrender. But here, a young George Washington really kind of learned his craft in the art of war. The major advantage of the British population of New France, so to speak, was only 80,000 people. Where you look at just the population of New England and in the British colonies, you're pushing almost 1 million people there. So definitely a large advantage for the British. Some of the important aspects: 1757, the British draft colonists for war. You think of go back to the draft during the Vietnam War. Drafting is not a brand new thing, where you start taking civilians and putting them to the army. The British also seized goods from the colonists to aid in the war effort. You got to remember, the British were across the whole ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, from their home base, so they used what was ever there. And this was done without consent or compensation. In other words, they didn't pay to use any of the supplies that the colonists would gave up for the war. In 1758, the war became increasingly unpopular. Go back again to the 1960s, the 70s. There's a lot of parallels in history. British turned back some power back to colonial governments and started to compensate the colonists. Colonists were not happy, and the British started realizing this, and so they tried to help them out a little bit by giving some power back to the colonial governments. In 1759, the fall of Quebec, and that was kind of the capital, so to speak, of the French in the New World. And it was pretty obvious that the French were going to be badly outnumbered here. In 1763, the Peace of Paris, the French forfeit all possessions in Canada and everything east of the Mississippi, a very, very large tract of land. And at this point, Canada becomes a British colony also. At this point, really, the French are taken out of the empire game, especially in the North American continent. There are some remnants, but for the most part, they are out of the North American continent. The population of England did not think the war was such a great idea because it cost too much. A lot of parallels. You go back to the Vietnam War. You can even go back to the Iraq and the Afghanistan War, now the War on Terror. There was a lot of concern there that it just cost too much. The French harbor resentment against the British and will seek the revenge later down the road. Well, go back to your history from last year when we started getting into the Revolutionary War. The French were our allies, and that helped turn the Revolutionary War against the British there. What problems arise between the colonists and the British after the French and Indian War? The Proclamation of 1763 established a line along the Appalachians, which the colonists were not supposed to cross. Well, let's face it. Anytime you tell somebody they can't go there, you know what's going to happen. They're end up going to go there. The colonists wanted to expand. It was a new world. The riches that lie beyond. It was a whole kind of almost the idea of this whole idea of manifest destiny. They knew what was out there. Trapping. Land they could farm, and who knows what riches they could find. And you were not going to keep the colonists, east of the Appalachians. British stationed troops along the colony's western borders to control the Native Americans. Well, you go back to the, even when the America put all the forts out in the west, in the 1880s. You start throwing troops out there. The Native Americans don't like it. Native Americans, you're impinging upon their land, and they don't like it, and you're going to start having battles and skirmishes there. Again, go back to the whole idea after the Civil War, when you had the whole western push into the Plain States and into the Rocky Mountains areas. British Parliament imposes greater taxes on colonists to help pay for the massive war debt. War is not cheap. Somebody's got to pay for it, and the British, the British monarchy, seeing it was in the colonies, they pretty much figured the colonists should pay for it. So you're talking about the Sugar Act, taxes on imports, the Stamp Act. Stamp had to be placed on wills, all sorts of documents, etc. We still see this to this day. The Townshend Act placed a tax on imports and tea. Go back to the Revolutionary time, the Boston Tea Party. The colonists were upset they had to pay taxes. And again, the colonies did not have any representation in the British Parliament. If people don't have a say in the government, they sure as heck aren't going to feel like helping to pay for that government. And all this kind of festered beneath the surface, and it led to the revolution later on, not too much farther down the road here.